Hello. I put a link to a YouTube video that shows some kid. I don't know if it's his father or not, but some kid has a sign that says, "Hello, I'm your kid. Welcome home from prison." And he's on the other side of glass. And 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 the guy, apparently maybe his real father, is walking there, but just to show on a mass scale because they don't realize this too. The people that are doing it. I'm not saying they're doing this, but on a mass scale, people do the same thing by knowing where people are going to be. They act and have other people perceive things and repeat things that are fake sequence shifts as rules with interbranch forging names and switching names, and increasingly names on off the corrections offices and judicial branch offices of Connecticut have roles with this. And I noticed a bunch of things tied to the names associated with doing those things, with those instances. They have like they have roles of wire crime acts and methods, and mail crime acts and methods, and acting tied to people putting predicate acts with facts in databases in the form of fake transcripts, fake ties to little kids and to adults, including at Weathersfield Police Station. They do this through time with multiple police stations and retired police chiefs from Weathersfield and their intimate ties involved with the same house/S, increasingly with their educators, and collusions with names next to each of the campuses I went to in my entire life. In other words, even ones they didn't go to. So that also shows things recorded, hyper evidential. Had honesty spoke for things like order or justice, we would have revealed needs to discern hyper evidential, distinct from evidential. We have black pupils, whites of eyes. It is hyper evidential that is inseparable from where and how. A breaching method had reassigned, where nature communicates with black and white. And then America's founders were born. And they were using James Madison's plan, which only had a means to counter them and to get them unentrenched to an extent. Our founders communicated for us to understand how both the North and the South had roles with slavery. And if they tried to deny those roles to an extent that necessary to overcome it, they would have been sensed, and that would have been adapted to. Everyone was fact, human nature tortured. Everyone was fact, human nature enslaved. Extorted and enslaved. Fact, human nature, therefore physically. All differences were played by the breaching method that had slavery entrenched northern colonies and southern colonies. That generates hyper evidential and demonstration of their slavery and having been, for example, having been strictly non-distinctly too, northern colonies and southern colonies. The suburbs too. The reason they look alike, northern colonies and southern colonies, is because they were internationally monitored conversations that made it highly criminal. Everyone was fact-nature extorted, tortured, and fact-nature enslaved, not even to be allowed to be hearing people speaking about building infrastructure outside of modern, internationally monitored conversations. They tactically denatured the suburbs, the design of them as a landscape theater with nature's demonstrations of it also employed by the breaching method before America's founders were born, to be used by instead of people showing that nature's demonstrating is a breaching method involved here, human factor nature breaching method. Instead, the breaching method effectively got the nature's demonstrations of itself and of all the roles with it caused to be blamed on other things, others ourselves. And it made more natures of private industries criminally foreign as criminal enterprises, and made private ones. Private and with collusions with the overt ones and the terrorists, and what witch trials are about, why and how the witch trials place. There's a witch trials place right next to Webb House, now renamed the Webb Stevens Museum, but all the founding locations still have other haven't been communicated for our founders, then they left us to communicate for themselves. That's why and how they communicate for us to understand them plural, as James Madison singular. And that was before he was before he was a president. It was his plan that James Madison and his founders, they were the ones with the leverage in the plan to counter extort and force the other founders inside of more than 13 colonies. But they could only do it to an extent. So, which unfolded to the original 13 and the rest still being counter extorted because we're not being freed yet. You guys are preventing us mandated law. You are changing and faking what people say and or our self-guide rules of the databases that have enabled all exceptions, exception nature too. You guys to use that. Also criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw. Names at next to each campus I went. Have roles with Channel 3 News with identity theft, fraud, slanders against me. Also with the sources of WTNH. They were our roles with mixed natures of organized crimes at the same time, totally distinct natures of organized crimes. They also brought up and bring up a whole bunch of different names of people and then pretend we had conversations with each other. And everyone's repeating fake things. Therefore, in other words, as roles with databases used criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw. They have male and female judges, but also have black and white female judges with some black KKK, Confederate flag theme, Latino theme, people with the state judicial offices and corrections offices with foreign and domestic military all along Route 175 from the founding locations in Old Wethersfield and next to them, increasingly involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders against me, with investigators, putting fake ties, fake motivations for it, and changing what was actually communicated there. And then they want to pretend other. No, and pretend they know me when they only know me in the rules planting evidences. Fake ties, fake and identity theft, fraud, slanders, intercities, on inter and intra campuses with their educators increasingly behind my back. I never had anything to do with a Joshua Stryker. He's involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders behind my back with the people who lead the schools, involved with the FBI and overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and hate groups and counters to hate groups as collusions with each other, also with sexual groups and roles with differences, racketeering, worse than war crimes. The same way the breaching method is involved with that. They can't defend that and their styles of roles and needs and natures with that as that and afford to have discern what American history is about. Can't afford to have discern honesty regarding what witch trials is about and why and how it's really next to the Webb House, next to Webb House with no love before it. And then they made it the Webb Stevens Museum. Worse than obfuscating that, putting layers of motivations, narratives, needs, natures, names, hyper additional, collusions, hiding the original reason why and how. No one was honest about that place because the breaching method had everyone's syntax, collusions with itself to an extent /s against everyone's self and against everyone around them. Otherwise, that body was sensed, including that body was a majority of people, including with every single person. Black people, with disbeliefs. So these are people that they were shown they need to defend their definitions of order. They are also tactically delusions raw. Their definitions of order, the people who have spoken for law. They're worse than just embarrassed. Because, in other words, black people's whites of eyes. This is about order. How and why there is one species body of individual bodies with all group differences generated by that which has totally different species bodies of individual bodies, all group differences generated by that which has all the different species bodies. Per its identity relationship to itself, and the value of that. Per its identity, per the extent we can discern, rather. And where that is only to an extent, it comes with its complete identity relationship to itself, and the value of that only increasing equally value with it. So we have these things like how we have black people's whites of eyes, and it generated by that which is generating the other species bodies too. We have with nature communicates replaced. Our pace. We have our founders' communications at the same time replaced. We have our founders' communications replaced, which is unfathomable. But to have our founders and nature's forced, we're not supposed to tell on it. You guys are preventing me from mandated law on here online. You have roles with the agencies and lawyers with criminally foreign influence, tactical illusions, route readings of statutes and precedents and exceptions and exception nature. They can't defend that by getting on paper legitimately. They are increasingly self-valued collusion slash S with all natures of crime scenes, with all ages and natures of campuses, and names next to them manifest that way as collusion slash S with people and motivations from other locations, but even worse than that. In other words, forgiveness is so we don't leave out the breaching method, which is recorded too. But where we can observe the method, there are a whole bunch of methods, plural, as styles, needs, and natures with the private criminal enterprises and overt criminal enterprises and terrorists originally instilled. The differences between the guilt as the roles with the witch trials, even if they're completely made up. Why and how there's a witch trials place next to right where George Washington had to come counter-extort while he was counter-extorted by James Madison and the founders behind his plan. That's critical to understanding American history. But we have these founding principles replaced, and we have names next to that location through time, increasingly involved with the World Trade Center predicate acts, identity theft, fraud, slanders, forcing people to fake, timing where people are going to be, and then making it look like to cover up what came before that and fake what came before that. That's on a mass scale happening every day. Many pray. Not, these are increasingly people in office, judicial branch offices and corrections offices of Connecticut, involved also with Facebook, personally and professionally, with all kinds of natures of organized crime acts and methods and digital crimes, also with whiting forensics and with the World Trade Center, is involved and has been involved with all kinds of natures of identity theft, fraud, slanders, and predicate acts with names at the judicial branch offices and all natures conjunctions to it and to that, like Wethersfield Pizza House has wire crimes too with them, with the judicial branch offices and the corrections office, and the judicial branch offices and Wethersfield Police. They have wire crime acts and methods, identity theft, fraud, slanders. They have a Stephen Stocko involved with people that live near me. They have extended family members involved with him with some sexual and medical offenders of kids. A Stephen Stocko also with the Foreign and Domestic Intelligence and FBI and courts with New Britain Superior Court and Harper Courts with their roles with New Britain Central Connecticut State University has a Stephen Stocko and a whole bunch of people tied to him. And the judicial branch offices also with the Wethersfield Police and wire crime acts and methods, forging and switching names. And the campuses further with names next to them with sexual and medical offenders and the security of the campuses. And you better get me off the fake conversations. And they're hiding what I found from my family. And they're forcing, checking, hurting, persuading them to collusion /S with the interbranch. They're fearing with the FBI that's refusing to get on paper with the New Britain Superior Court and the Harper Courts and their family members and intimate ties before the World Trade Center attack. Connecticut had roles with these same names, with conclusions with the same names, with ones also named Scalora and Keene, and with the Ninth Circuit Court next to the World Trade Center in Manhattan, right before the attack, as collusions with the same names. People with the name DeMorrow and Cololo and O'Brien have all kinds of wire crimes with them, putting predicate acts with facts and databases with them roles. Identity theft, fraud, slanders rolls with them. All kinds of predicate acts rolls with them. With Joshua Schumack, Robert Rodriguez too. On my street, Robert Rodriguez. He's recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with a whole bunch of foreign and domestic people, planting evidences, fake ties, fake natures of ties to me, acting so other people can. I didn't even communicate. Then he confirmed things on Facebook, and then they took my Facebook page again. They made fake Facebook pages to pretend to be me too. A bunch of people with New Britain Superior Court are personally and professionally involved with the FBI and with Facebook, personally and professionally, all along Route 175 from the founding locations in Old Wethersfield. Again, founding locations with the communications about that place still replaced from what our founders communicated about how George Washington was counter-extorted and forced to counter-extort the other founders there. And force means to win the last battle of the Revolutionary War. And so to begin further getting unentrenched that which was still entrenched northern colonies and southern colonies, even with the torture, extortion, and slavery against each our black pupils, whites of eyes, non-distinctly northern and southern colonies and southern colonies. Even though, in other words, we're going to pay attention to how James Madison's plan forced the Constitutional Convention. James Madison's plan forced the Declaration of Independence. James Madison's plan forced the ability for a bunch of little fakes to pretend fake motivations like against the T-tax. In other words, what really allows unity is the counter-extortion, but not legitimate unity. Not legitimate voices, one, or we would not have had black people's whites of eyes left out. We would not have had what's recorded on a mass scale. People are timing where others are going to go, and they're exploiting that later. In each year, before and since the World Trade Center attack, Central Connecticut State University and intelligence on all sides of them, they have collusions with Wethersfield names each year, and with ones intercities. A whole bunch of people tied to the Diddy case, too, before I even heard it was a Diddy case. I told you that. Get them on paper, one name in sequence. And these people have the audacity to be using celebrities and sports people to pretend they're fake things with them. And they have the audacity to be speaking about crimes when their roles with predicate acts and facts in those crime scenes. Get them to get into it. In other words, a lot of people, in other words, get them out of the, in other words, get them on paper, and everyone will see a whole bunch of private criminal enterprises originally still are only capable of being per what you had replaced, like our founders' communications and like nature's itself, black pupils, here, who disbelieves, force them onto paper. Here, now, please. Ron Adams is also one of the ones recorded involved with FBI and courts, involved with police, with sexual and medical offenders, identity theft, fraud, slanders, playing games with it, too. In other words, what's the name of those cops you see? You brought up Brian Adams when you switch, you get paid. Did you say Powers? Powers was one of the name, Officer Powers. Is that the name you said? Because there are more people involved with this principal upskirt nature and ones years ago who were abused by ones who also had roles with that, were forcing the other one. And I don't have the police on paper and one name in sequence in the courts. And still I don't have a response for what I caught them doing with the kids and hiding from the parents, which is important because they're hiding the hyper evidential. They're hiding how they've been collusions with databases, which actually recorded. In other words, forget their jobs, get them on paper. And you brought up Brian Adams too. You brought up Judge Napolitano. Let's play now. No more games. Let's get this up. Officer Powers, the other names of the cops you brought up. Let's get them on paper. With the rest of the people involved, with the police switching and forging names, refusing to get on paper, like with these retired police chiefs from Wethersfield. Get them on paper. What am I lying about, Ron Adams? You brought it up. You brought up Judge Napolitano's name, and you said you were at a wedding with him after you already brought up the officers' names. And you're bullshit with that. Playing games with people you don't even know. Or you're someone who knows me, you're trying to pretend you're fake nature tied to me. In other words, a bunch of people tied to you, Ron Adams, like a Joshua Julian on the Facebook page of a principal child abuser's campus, involved with my neighbors and people playing to evidence on all sides of my house, and the names that you brought up. You brought them up. You brought up Judge Napolitano's name. Joe DeMauro did. He was recorded involved with wire crimes, mail crimes, and the police before that, too. In the courts, forging and switching names, predicate acts with kids, child abusers, leaders of kids years apart, overt criminal enterprise and private ones, medical and sexual offenders of kids' roles of home breakings in my area. You fear God. Play games with me, Ron Adams. See, you keep saying I make lies. They record, confess, demonstrate, confirm. People record, confess, demonstrate, confirm you involved with them. Pretending conspiracy theories, changing and faking digital evidences. Whiting forensics also has roles with that. With the Joshua Julian involved with this Ron Adams. And people with the name Kalol. People with the name Kirk and K-N-E-R-R too. involved also with fire departments and corners of streets, with wire crimes with the Wethersfield Police, and town lines with foreign and domestic military Marines. Are you in the Marines, Ron Adams? You should fear God if you're in the Marines, my Ron Adams, playing games with child offenders, with other people's names, with your own. You're a fake. You know those people along Route 3, increasingly people along Route 3 involved with the state judicial branch offices and with their educators putting fake things in databases. Educators I had recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed a whole bunch of people tied to 80 Carroll Drive, like people with the name Kerr and DeMorrow, have roles with some mayors and with some sexual and medical offenders of kids years apart, involved with you too, John Rams. And they brought up the name Napolitano too. You're in a wedding with Judge Napolitano, you said. Would you have three accounts and then you're calling people liar? You're over here chilling, protecting people from getting a response about the interbranch forging names, switching names, refusing to identify themselves legitimately, all kinds of falsified police reports, all kinds of collusions with the news and their sources. WTNH and W has roles along Ridge Road with things they should fear, and they're hiding it from them. And the conjunctions to it, like Route 175, and conjunctions to it, like Ridge Road, is increasingly involved with people involved with the World Trade Center attack and predicate acts with the databases, identity theft, fraud, slander. They're making people take pictures so they can pretend people are lying when they'll say they don't know others, like a Paul Kelly. Increasingly, people tied to a Paul Kelly are involved with sources and as sources of WTNH, involved with sexual and medical offenders, identity theft, fraud, slanders. And Mark Violet and Mike Violet and their mother involved with Yukon and their father with foreign and domestic military. What are they doing with the Koreans? Playing games with the fake identity theft sequence shifts. I never had communications with them. They took a picture next to me. I didn't even go and walk near them. They're trying to put fake ties, fake natures of ties to me, pretending with pictures with people involved with this Ron Adams. Also, in other words, it's gone. So people, Judge Napolitano, I've been asking him for a long time. Fox News won't respond. They have wire crime acts with the phones that all the places have. They just change, and the agencies change. They fake digital evidences. Wethersfield Police, they faked me being at the Wethersfield Police Station and speaking with them as a kid and now as an adult. Ron Adams, let's speak about these officers. You brought up their names. Then you switched the names. Then you brought up Judge Napolitano. Why would you bring up Judge Napolitano? Play games. Do you know the principal being or the other people next to Fox Connecticut News tied to child abusers? People with a Kerr and Perone have a bunch of people tied to them too, with the Mark Violet and some sexual and medical offenders of kids. I never saw them on a campus in my life. The people named Perone, I never saw Kerrs. I saw one of them on campus real fast. That was to make a fake exception of knowing me because they were covered up. I caught them before that, involved with criminal enterprises, private ones, and they have rules with some Sammy the Bull, confessions and threats against my neighbor. But these are fake sides of issues where they just put fake things in databases. They're increasing little rat bags with the state judicial branch offices and corrections offices, involved with my neighbor's named Colo, involved with his educators, with some sexual and medical offenders of kids at Hartford Hospital and Wethersfield Police. They attached me to fake conversations with them at the Wethersfield Police Station and people at Hartford Hospital with the name Leahy, involved with a bunch of people on my street, involved with some Ray Colo and people with the name O'Brien, with multiple police departments, intercities of Connecticut, also with the FBI and courts, switching and forging names and their family members, involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders. Then they put these punks like Ron Adams on here to chill for chilling effects and for identity theft, fraud, slanders, and for people to say, oh, look, other people were saying the same thing. They're messing with the algorithm too. That Facebook has roles with that too, personally. Facebook has rules with people at and before and after the World Trade Center attack. Before Facebook was standing, they had people involved with them, involved with Saudi attackers, in America's side. And on both those sides, where are used remotely, criminally, foreign influence, tactically, delusions, raw. That's why and how they have some religious passion nutbags and some counters to them, like an atheist theme involved with Dean Judd and his kid, also involved before and after the World Trade Center attack intercities with the FBI and his co-defendants. Former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, his co-defendants and their family members, also involved with rape, Ron Adams with chilling, and with identity theft, fraud, slanders with the news media. In other words, they have celebrities involved with this too, jumping into and just saying whatever, changing with the same subject treatment. So how could they even get away with leaving how we have black people's rights of eyes from slavery? How could they even get over the same ones pretending to be against hate groups? They have some black, white KKK themed military on off the state judicial branch offices, increasingly with names on off Two-Route Highway, and where it runs into Hangtog Lane and their conjunctions like Route 3 and the Berlin Turnpike before the heart of Hartford. These are increasingly people involved with a bunch of judges and prosecutors and their family members and victims advocates involved with the same house/S and people with services foreign and domestic countries, overt criminal enterprises involved with the same house/S and their educators, putting fake things in databases, refusing to identify themselves legitimately into branch family members. I can give them my paper. And they pretended they had conversations with me as a kid, and I was an adult. And look, I even found out they were putting fake conversations with me with WFSB, Connecticut Channel 3 News. They pretended fake conversations with me through the news and about legal cases where they have personally and professionally roles with the kids of co-defendants, a former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and their neighbors involved with sexual and medical offenders of kids, forcing it, and with state police increasingly, and whiting forensics increasingly tied to child abusers' kids, and people planting evidences by timing where people are going to be, etc. In other words, so this Ron Adams is a bad guy. What were you doing? What were you doing at the wedding of Judge Napolitano, Ron Adams? Why are you playing games? Why don't you bring up the names of the cops you brought up? Why are you playing games? You brought up the cops' names. Why are you changing it now? You were what? You were what? You were invited for what? Mandated law means that the interbranch are not supposed to play games, forging and switching names, and collusions at crime scenes with a whole bunch of different countries tied to their families, and overt criminal enterprises and private ones at the same time, and the news and the names next to it, and they rolls with campuses planting evidence. That's how it's recorded. It's how they stay so stupid with subject treatments. It's not even debatable. The suburbs were designed before America's founders were even born. They were designed for torture, extortion, in fact, human nature, slavery, therefore physical, and to be distinct from the suburban/urban, like Hartford, where they then made they made nice houses close together, designed to be, demolished, turned into buildings for apartments. They then make 2-3 family houses, and to make a nature of communications where, you hear this or this, someone said that, or did you know something? And these are people, investigators recorded themselves being and having been used remotely, criminally, foreign influence, tactically, delusions, raw, and online. Whiting Forensics has a whole bunch of people tied to Ron Adams, involved with the Joshua Julian and a Ray Colo, involved with predicate acts on my street, with police that are refusing to identify themselves legitimately. They recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed also that there's some people with the name Scalora involved with them with predicate acts. Also, police families and intelligence families, intercities also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed that, and people with Facebook. I never had a class with a Scalora, didn't even go to my school, and he reportedly had a girlfriend. He lied about himself and me, fake ties to me with my neighbors, reportedly his cousins. A whole bunch of people tied to their extended family members. I don't know at all. In other words, and ones that went out of their way to make it look like they know me, but they don't know me. And then they're involved too with child abusers, leaders of kids, years apart, and they forced that principle being. There's a Mike Levine too that he brought up. They have people that we use the same names, and women with the name Bobby and Bobby Jean, and they have a women with the name. A whole bunch of people with Park Street involved with cultural racketeering and inter differences racketeering with judges and prosecutors. Harper Courts have a bunch of people with Park Street's Lena Pizza involved with Central Connecticut State University and with sex offenders in Wethersfield involved with them switching and forging names with other natures of organized crimes, medical offenders of kids involved with Park Street with the FBI and with this Daryl Sullivan and people with the corrections offices with unmarked police forms where we've been using right to lie where they don't have the right to lie as the breaching method they would. And their educators are increasingly involved. Increasingly, the educators of people from my grammar school have been putting sequence shifts, fake ties, fake natures of ties to me, and covering up what came first. Collusion /S. Increasingly, their roles with body dumping spots. People in my fourth grade class, fifth grade class, and sixth grade class that is increasingly tied to confessions from strangers tied to them with the body dumping spots with the mayors too. Former Mayor Gold is increasingly involved with people from Whiting forensics with confessions, fake ties, fake natures of ties to me. And they're with their educators. They put fake things in databases. There's also people with the name Chet Casper that are some doctors. I don't ever had a conversation with him. He's faking things in databases per them with people in my area involved with them, and a former Mayor Gold and educators of a Chet Casper are involved with the FBI, and some people involved with the next to Fox Connecticut News with a bunch of natures of organized crime and federal evidences crimes, also with co-defendants of former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and different natures of conjunctions to them. Thaddeus Grabowski recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed also with the intelligence. There's Allison Mulcahy and her family enrolls with Hangdog Lane names and conjunctions to it and Two Rod Highway. They have roles with, I never had a word of conversation with in my life, never saw it on campus in my life. She has roles with next to Fox Connecticut News with Thaddeus Grabowski and former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, with a bunch of people with Connecticut's district court right before that and since. Involved with them with predicate acts, federal evidences, crimes, identity theft, fraud, slanders. That's what this Brian Adams involved with too. Besides chilling, and his roles with the social media of Fox News, and now we're hiding this from Judge Napolitano and other judges are increasingly roles with the agencies changing and faking digital evidences on a mass scale, right through administrations. They played the Democrats and the Republicans. It's recorded how stupid they are when they counter each other, when they're defending their counters to each other too. They came through sick campuses, black pupils. Here, so we need to get them on paper. Rick C.M. Baglione recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. There's their roles with the daughter of a principal at the school I went with. Has a Kevin Harris and involved with his mother and his family, putting fake things in databases with sexual and medical offenders of kids. In the Britain Superior Court has a Brian Silver, has a district court involved with him too, and Harper Courts also with their family and intimate ties, like a Eric Burgess involved with Emily or Amy too, before and after the World Trade Center attack. Roles with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and the courts that have been planting evidences at West Hartford locations with them. The court involved themselves with the deposition criminally. Most depositions of an FBI director would be from inside of a prison, but this is a pro se, civil RICO case that my father was involved with. I didn't know it was tied to that. The FBI director and the Hartford courts were planting evidences to cover up and crimes with their roles with the intercampuses. A bunch of people from Weathersfield Interbranch have been at West Hartford locations in New Britain Superior Court. I mean, New Britain's New Britain, a whole bunch of people with New Britain Superior Court, also with all sides of Central Connecticut State University, with Hartford courts and Connecticut District Court, with a whole bunch of nations and Saudis and Americans that had self-body collusions with the World Trade Center attack. Per a hyperforeign there, that which also had non-distinctly northern colonies and southern colonies slavery entrenched. These are also some black KKK, Confederate flag theme, Latino theme, and interreligious in nutbags with sexual and medical offenders with Facebook, involved with the Facebook page of the principal being of his campus, Highcrest School. And there are more people with the Board of Education and buildings next to it involved with overt criminal enterprises and private ones. There are people online trying to make evidences lies, fake ties, fake nature of the ties to me. People that sought me out, and they'll tell you when you ask them correctly, the same people that have been pretending things on Facebook and YouTube with the courts refusing to identify themselves. New Britain Superior Court has a bunch of Facebook pages involved with people with the name KNERR and with the name KERR. There are people on a Morgan Circle who have a bunch of guns and roles with the military. They might have roles with Secret Service. They have roles with some judges and prosecutors. Increasingly, a bunch of people with the name Smith and Cullen are involved with a Ray Collo near me and his father, Ray Collo, with a Phil Collo. There's a Phil Collo involved with a Bob Chase, with the UN, and with Whiting Forensics, and with a Joshua Julian, involved planting evidence on all sides of my house, with people who have been doing it since I was a kid, also with my educators behind my back. I've been asking them since I was a kid to get them on paper because they have overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and roles with the breaching method. That I want that the other names involved. It's not just their names. In other words, they're trying to leave out their roles with all these different countries. They have people from Germany. Germany. You guys have people with psychiatry involved with the counters to you guys, and you guys, your representatives collusions, like with this Joshua. Well, a whole bunch of people at Hartford Hospital have some KKK, Confederate flag theme, Latino theme, black theme, sexual groups themed, and they're protecting passions and emotions and repeating fake things behind people's backs. And they're in fake conversations with people. They can't communicate with people legitimately, face to face. They're a bunch of little fakes. So a bunch of people at Hartford Hospital's campus and next to it have collusions with names on my street and all sides of it through time, and with their educators. That has something to do with this Ron Adams and the other people with the Facebook pages of the Weathersfield Police. There's a Joshua Schumack and his mother. I don't know his mother's name. I never had anything to do with them. They try to make it look like other and lied about what came first. Well, I know them. A Joshua Schumack has collusions with people at 3 spots at the end of the Borough Turnpike and with golf courses involved in Cromwell and one in Hartford involved. In other words, what are they doing with it? Are they with? In other words, are they with? So they have foreign and domestic. They have Marines and other military involved with this Joshua Schumack, with the corrections officers, judicial branch officers too, for the people involved that I do know tied to him, involved with him and his mother with the Facebook page of Weathersfield Police with some sexual and medical offenders and police that fake me being at the conversations with them and being at the police station as a kid and then as an adult. I went there as an adult. I had one conversation with the officer there. They stole a sentence I said, and they put they put another additional falsified police report roll from the one associated with a Bob Chase for the same arrest. So some Mendez police have been fabricating falsified police reports, plural, for the same arrest with people at the crime scenes involved with sexual and medical offenders that are directly involved with people on my street. I don't know where they live, but there are people with the name Mendez next to and involved also with a Christina Sioka and people tied to her with some sexual and medical offenders. People with the name Gilmore put me in a fake conversation with a Gilmore involved with a Christina Sioka next to a Montessori school, and their rules with the databases criminally foreign influence at the campuses and use/s of that at other locations. I never had a word of conversation in my life with a Kevin Harris. They have been planting evidences, acting so people can film recorded things on campuses and other can fill in what came first. They're making up what came first. They're putting fake ties, fake natures of ties to me with a Fred Grisey. A Fred Grisey is involved with sexual and medical offenders of kids with Wethersfield campuses through time, with private school kids, involved with retired police chiefs and their intimate ties on my family, on my street, involved with sexual and medical offenders of kids with a Fred Grisey. I never saw him around. He came as alone to confess this as a stranger to me on my street. In other words, it's the same with the people tied to him. And then years later, I never knew anything. What do you call it? A spy to make confessions about him being involved with that. Their rules, they're lied to who influence them to ask questions and things. They're using investigators, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, but they're also attaching everyone to fake words. The ones that's why you have to get them onto paper. A bunch of judges and their family members are tied to that same house/s next to me, and tied to a bunch of judges and prosecutors putting fake things, planting evidences with people from other areas on my street and online, like with this Brian Adams, I don't know at all, and with people that brought up Judge Napolitano's name, like Ron Adams and a Joe DeMoro. A Joe DeMoro also looks a lot like Aaron Mate. Aaron Mate, there's also someone with the name Aaron, I don't know him. They might have taken a picture of him walking by me one time. He walked by me one time and he doesn't know me either. Also, Larry walked by me one time on campus too. That's it. He doesn't know me either. I know the only time I ever saw him, I never communicated with him. Larry Martin. These are increasingly people involved with the Joe DeMoro, involved with a Judge Napolitano. And I never had a word of conversation to the girl that had something to do with. I think it was Ray was tied to Ray Cole was tied to the Napolitano girl, and Joe DeMoro was a boyfriend of the other girl. I believe. I don't know what they were doing. In other words, it has something to do with their roles with names on all sides of the Wethersfield Community Center. And at the community center, their roles with a Dillon family has been putting fake things in the databases there. Fake ties, fake natures of ties to me. Also with people with the name Demain, and also with the ones named Mendez, with the spots next to Fox Connecticut News and Harper, Connecticut, involved also with Fox News, with predicate acts, organized crimes, and federal evidences crimes, and with courts switching and forging names in police forms, with wire mail crime methods, falsified police reports, arrays of falsified police reports. There's nothing to respond to because they have confessions tied to that, and they're putting just charges of all fake things. They're refusing to give me a police report where they put me in prison while they were forcing a principal child abuser, and they hid that from the parents and further are doing that. I want a response. I'm the one who found it. I didn't even tell people about that, and I'm still not being allowed to speak about it. You're going to get them on paper, someone, please. Or you're going to get on paper yourself. You should fear God to not be on paper. Like this Ron Adams, you brought up cops. You brought up this Judge Napolitano, too, after you brought them up. And in other words, you replied Wethersfield. I don't remember exactly what you said. Do you know Joe DeMoro, Ron Adams? Do you know Ron was doing? Okay, thank you, people. Please get them on paper, one name and sequence. Wethersfield Police have a Wethersfield Judicial Branch offices and corrections offices that has rules with collusions with a bunch of Connecticut courts, with a bunch of people tied to the same house/s, and they're increasingly building on their rules with their educators too, with predicate acts, with fake things in databases, and with some black KKK, Confederate flag theme, Latino theme, and with female judges involved with the child abusers at the same time. All kinds of mixed natures of organized crime. I'm not the same because that most say, let's tack them on that. These are people with the military and next to the campuses planting evidences with there. The FBI and his co-defendants and with other countries, they're planted evidences at Trinity College with a Joshua Stryker too, as involved with some wire crimes with a Police use the name Darth Vader too. They're involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders, and refusing to identify themselves legitimately. Judge Napolitano. Get them on paper, one name and sequence. I shouldn't have to beg through the cyberspace for you. And YouTube, please get the FBI to fear God if they're proclaiming my posts. And with the judges and courts, get them on paper, one name and sequence. Watch themselves.